The hero's world was anything but normal. It was fractured, torn wide open, by gates that shattered the very fabric of reality, unleashing terrifying monsters into the streets and forests. These ravenous beasts roamed, driven by hunger and violence, leaving humanity no choice but to fight back. And so, he fought tirelessly. Day by day, month after month, year after grueling year, for 10 long years, he simply survived. Every single moment was consumed by relentless struggle. But despite everything, with just a single sword, he mastered cutting down any monster that dared to challenge him. Fear had long since abandoned him. The dread that once haunted his every breath had vanished over time. But change came, suddenly and unexpectedly. The mastermind behind all this chaos finally revealed himself. This powerful being confronted the hero, delivering a chilling, devastating truth. The very world he had fought so fiercely to protect had already fallen. The creature mocked his desperate efforts, calling it a complete waste of talent. It urged him to abandon everything and become its ultimate weapon instead. But the hero refused. There was no hesitation, no second thought. He laughed in defiance and launched an attack directly at the creature. His blade struck its massive fingers, but the blow did absolutely nothing. The monster remained completely unaffected. Then, without warning, the beast countered. One devastating punch was all it took. The impact sent him flying across the ground, utterly overwhelmed and helpless. The monster's voice dripped with cruel mockery. It declared that no matter how much he struggled, he would always be nothing more than a mere insect. Still, he didn't give up. He rose again, charged forward, attacking with everything he had. But the result didn't change. Another crushing blow hurled him back into the ground. As he lay there, something glinting caught his eye. A strange pendant hung from the monster's chest. Instinct screamed at him. It was crucial. With all the fading strength he had left, he hurled his sword at the pendant. The blade struck perfectly true, and a gaping hole blasted open in the monster's chest. The beast let out a furious roar, calling him a bastard, as searing pain ripped through its body. After the fierce clash, the hero lay utterly still. He looked up at the sky. Despite the chaos and searing pain, the sky above presented a stunning sight. The scene then shifts to a completely different place, where we spot another young man, walking directly toward the Namsen gate. Upon his arrival, he was promptly instructed to register his number and scan his unique ID. The staff warned him that mere civilians, lacking any proper hero status, were forbidden from entering, but he broke the rules anyway. He simply kicked the gate wide open and walked right in, catching everyone's attention as a brazen, unregistered hero who had just forcibly pushed his way through. Nearby, a group of figures emerged from the forest. One of them then called out to the young man, saying they'd lost something back there, and were just about to depart. They casually invited him to come along. A girl in the group gave him a searching look. Something felt off about him, particularly his clothes. It didn't match the gear a typical hunter would sport. Still, she knew hunters wore all kinds of gear these days. His outfit and his baggage just felt strange. She wondered if he'd made a huge mistake, and thought he was part of the hero squad. The others in the group started murmuring. One member of the group then spoke. He'd already mentioned this guy was totally new. Their leader finally spoke up. He said he'd seen countless people just like him. He understood what new folks often thought, after watching all those hunting videos, or reading articles about gates online. But things weren't nearly that simple. Becoming a licensed hunter demanded going through all the proper channels, licensing, training, and passing incredibly strict tests. If the young man truly wished to begin, he'd have to start at the absolute bottom, starting as an F rank and working his way up. The young man, on the other hand, understood the implied meaning behind their words, but showed no gratitude, and that clearly irked some. A bald man reacted with a surge of anger, unable to contain his fury. Another younger man then urged not to be stopped. This time, they were hopping for a chance. The team leader pressed on, making it crystal clear that if someone ignored sincere advice, they'd eventually have to face the harsh reality themselves. He went on to explain that the gates were far from the fantasies people imagined. They were brutal, violent, and utterly unforgiving places. Suddenly, an orc materialized before them. It charged forward, full of menace. But without a single word, the boy calmly set his baggage down and muttered to himself, "It's been 10 years. Then, with a single punch, he obliterated the orc's head. The blow was impossibly powerful and swift, scattering the creature's remains in an instant. At that moment, we realized that the mysterious boy was none other than the hero we'd talked about previously, and as silence returned and the dust settled, he whispered softly to himself, nothing had changed at all. We then learned that the hero had traveled into the past and reincarnated into the body of a boy named Dajun. Dajun gripped the sword tightly in his hands, the weight of it familiar, after years of wielding such weapons. From the body of the fallen beast, he extracted a low-grade mana stone. He examined it briefly, recalling a time in the past, when he wouldn't have even glanced at something of such poor quality. Back then, stones like this would have been considered mere grime, worthless, and beneath his notice. Suddenly, voices echoed from behind him, several distinct and alert tones. They came from a group approaching from the rear. One of the flames from his earlier attack still lingered in the air. Without hesitation, and still holding the mana stone, he responded to the threat. In an instant, he killed one of them. The bag he carried had served its purpose, so he threw it aside without a second thought. As the old team began to move away, some of the girls within the group couldn't help but speak up. One of them commented on that rude guy from earlier. He wondered aloud if he might truly end up dead. Another girl spoke up, questioning if she was genuinely worried about him. The leader stepped in to clarify the situation. He explained that, if the boy were an intruder, then by now agents from the control center would have already been dispatched. After all, this was the Namsen Gate, a high-ranking A-rank gate. As such, elite B-rank agents or higher would be sent. In response, the leader assured them that, as long as the boy didn't lose his mind and recklessly charge into hordes of monsters, he wouldn't die. There was no need for concern. The bald man agreed, saying the leader was right. He imagined the boy must be shaking with fear right now, just standing still and waiting for the agents to come save him. He repeated that idea, convinced the arrogant punk they had encountered earlier would surely be trembling, unable to act. But the reality was quite the opposite. While they believed he was frozen in fear, it was the troll in front of Dodan who was shaking. Without hesitation, Dajun punched the troll squarely in the face, the blow echoing with raw force. Another troll lunged at him, trying to strike, but Dajun dodged the attack swiftly. He retreated a short distance, then jumped, using that momentum to propel himself upward. He landed atop the troll and delivered a brutal leg strike, finishing it off with crushing power. After the dust settled, he noted to himself that 3 more magic stones had been added to his collection. He assessed his total haul so far: 12 low-grade stones and 6 blue-tier, mid-grade stones. It wasn't the most impressive harvest, he admitted to himself. Still, he continued on. He looked back. Standing behind him now were agents from the gate control center. They had arrived and promptly announced themselves. They requested he show his hero registration ID. If he was unregistered, they informed him, he would need to accompany them to the control center. For official documentation, the gate control center's voice repeated its stern request, demanding he comply with their instructions. Dajun, already annoyed, grumbled inwardly about how utterly irritating the situation was. He didn't voice his frustration aloud, but his irritation was glaringly clear. The lead agent promptly ordered his subordinate to prepare the restraints. He added a formal request for Dajun's cooperation, adding that if he refused, they'd be authorized to use physical force. Another stark warning followed. Any injury resulting from resistance, the agent explained, would be entirely Dajun's responsibility. The best solution, the agent said, would be to resolve the issue calmly. At the control center, Dodan reached out, seizing the agent's hand. Instantly, the agent's confidence evaporated. He was struck by overwhelming pressure, radiating from Dodan, a force far beyond anything he expected. The agent froze, paralyzed by terror. Dajun gave a brief, sharp warning. Don't bother him, just leave. The other 2 agents prepared to launch a counterattack, but Dajun remained completely calm. He evaluated them, considering their strength. A rank 4 magic seed, he thought, might work on ordinary monsters like orcs, but this situation was entirely different. He looked directly at the agents and gave one final, chilling warning. If you don't want to get hurt, you should leave now. Dajun moved without hesitation. The incoming attacks were stopped effortlessly. With just a single sweep of his cape, he sent one opponent flying, another lunged at him, but that one too was knocked away with utter ease. He turned his head slightly, and in an instant, disappeared from sight. In the next moment, he reappeared right in front of the lead agent, driving a devastating punch straight into his stomach. The agent groaned, utterly caught off guard, but he managed to speak, explaining that registered heroes typically faced no problems, unless they committed highly illegal acts within the gate's confines. Dajun then asked about the rules concerning rift zones. The agent visibly faltered, clearly disturbed by the question. He thought of passages opening up all over the world, creating zones of pure chaos and danger. Monsters emerged from these rifts, and from these hunts, byproducts like magic stones were harvested and converted into new energy forms. The government kept strict control over such areas. Areas under full surveillance were labeled as gates. But the unknown, uncontrolled passages, those were terrifyingly known as rift zones. Dajan pressed again. No matter which gate he entered, would the authorities always come for him, accusing him of trespassing? Or worse. The agent confirmed this grim truth. If an unregistered hero entered a gate, without proper authorization, the control center would be automatically alerted. Agents on standby near the scene would be dispatched immediately. He added that rift zones weren't easy to access, and even in such unstable airspace, the association wouldn't simply sit back idly. Dajan merely shrugged, completely unconcerned. The agent stared at him with sheer terror. He thought to himself, this boy must be insane. He cursed inwardly, regretting that he hadn't reported the incident to headquarters from the start. But as he turned to run, Dajan grabbed him by the face and effortlessly threw him aside. He dismissed the man as nothing more than a mere nobody. Another agent stepped forward, absolutely enraged. He shouted that next time, he'd definitely kill Dojin. But the scene abruptly shifted to another flashback. The monster Dajan had previously killed still lay where it fell. Its necklace, once whole, now utterly shattered. Dajan reflected on the strange events that had just unfolded. He remembered the voice that had screamed, so close to his ears. Right before everything went dark, it had felt like his consciousness was being pulled into another realm entirely. That sensation. He could only describe it as death. But just then, he sharply opened his eyes. Standing before him was a mysterious boy. The boy asked who he was, and Dajun responded with his name. The other soul revealed he was dying. He added that if his final wish were granted, he would disappear without a fuss. Dajun refused, but the dying man explained that he no longer felt any attachment to life after fighting for 10 grueling years. He had been betrayed by a comrade he once trusted, his country utterly destroyed, his friends dead, and his family gone too. Despite struggling and surviving for so long, he had faced relentless hunger and crushing despair. He guessed Dajun knew that feeling all too well. Dajun countered that even if his own life was miserable, he didn't want the same for his surviving grandmother and his young siblings. They deserved better. The soul paused, then asked for just one thing. What did Dajun want? Dajun responded with a wish of his own. The narration shifted to the sprawling cityscape of Seoul, specifically to the area now famously known as the Hero Complex. This region, once teeming with tech and digital companies, was now dominated by exchanges, dealing in gate byproducts. Dojin walked the bustling streets, glancing at shop signs, wondering which place to enter. He made his way into one, and was greeted by a cashier. He stated that he wanted to sell some mana stones. The cashier welcomed him, boasting they had the best rates not only in Seoul, but in all of Korea. Dojun pulled out a bag full of mana stones, and emptied its contents onto the table. The cashier stared silently at the bloody stones, mentally noting they could have at least been cleaned. Nonetheless, the cashier commented on the sheer quantity, and began meticulously sorting through them. While doing so, he offered Dojun a cup of coffee while he waited. Dojun agreed. Once sorted, the cashier gave his assessment: 12 low-grade mana stones, 16 mid-low grade, and 5 high-low grade ones. He reminded Dojun that the commission was 40% of the purchase price, hoping he was already aware of that. After a moment of rapid calculation, he informed Dojun that his total payout would be 5.46 million won. Dojun instantly objected. I did all the hunting, yet all the store did was buy their goods, yet they demanded a whopping 40% cut. The cashier didn't bat an eye. He explained Dojun clearly didn't get how their business operated. In fact, they usually charged 45%, but this time, they were offering him a special deal. If he didn't like it, he could take his stones elsewhere, though he likely wouldn't find a better price. Dojun retorted that he would do just that. He began gathering his mana stones back into his bag, but the cashier stopped him. He reminded Dajun that sorting wasn't free. There was a sorting fee of 300,001 gold, plus 1 gold for the coffee. Since they had to use an expensive towel to wipe off the blood, since they couldn't use it anymore, he owed an additional 50,001 gold for the towel. In total, the cashier demanded 350,001 gold. Dojun declared he didn't have the money. If they wanted it, they could try to take it by force. The cashier warned him, stating they had C-rank heroes backing them up. These were no weaklings. Right on cue, the heroes entered the shop, and one of them asked what was going on, and if someone was causing trouble again. Then, their eyes met. The boy began by tearing through the C-rank mercenaries, who merely posed as heroes. All 3 of them were beaten down without much effort. After the last one fell, he stepped up to the cashier. Calmly, he told him the commission would now be 1%. It was best to keep things smooth from now on. He promised he'd be back. Back at home, He handed all his earnings to an elderly woman and a young girl. The grandmother gazed at the bundle and asked what all that money was. The boy explained that some time ago, he had lent money to a friend starting a business, and that business had turned into a massive success. The grandmother asked if he truly had such a friend. He replied that back where he grew up, there had been a friend he used to hang around with. She responded that, of course, she remembered that place. The young girl turned to him, eyes bright, asking if they were rich now. He nodded and said, yes. From now on, things were going to be different. She laughed, practically dancing around the room, excitedly chanting about how rich they were becoming. He fell into a deep thought, remembering a moment from the past, the times, real times Dodian had once spoken to himself, saying he truly hoped Grandma and Yang would finally live in a house, safer than anywhere else in the world. Then, without even waiting for a reply, he had simply vanished. When the hero's soul that replaced him awoke, he times had become Dodian. The safest house in Korea, at the current market price, cost 110 billion won. There was no obligation for him to fulfill such a one-sided promise. But he thought that if even a little of his strength returned, that astronomical amount of money would mean absolutely nothing to him. Rifts, gates, and monsters were all significantly weaker than what he had known in his own world. Compared to his past battles as a sword god, this world felt like mere child's play. Not even 10% of his full strength had returned to him. His thoughts were suddenly interrupted by a voice calling out. It asked if he was even there. He stood up and told them he'd go check. They should definitely stay inside. Outside, he was met by a menacing group of gangsters. They greeted him with mocking words, reminding him about repaying his borrowed money. They demanded to know if he even realized how much he owed. Now, the sum had ballooned to 48 million won. He quickly realized exactly who they were. The infamous loan sharks. The times, real times Dodon had borrowed money from them before dying. That 5 million won, once borrowed to pay for Grandma's hospital bills, had now multiplied tenfold in an incredibly short time. The biggest guy in the group stepped forward, smirking. He claimed they knew Dodon had recently made money through a gate and demanded he hand over every last one. Another, a shorter thug, said they were only taking what was due, according to the contract, and told him not to feel wronged. But before those words could fully leave the man's mouth, a devastating punch landed square on the big guy's face. It was him. He just struck the gangster without an ounce of hesitation. The smaller man stumbled back, reeling, shocked. He stammered apologies. Utterly flustered, he offered apologies. He calmly explained, however, that he had already repaid over 9 million won. If anyone was owed money here, it was him. The loan shark, trembling in fear, asked if he was truly dodging payment. He gave the man a sharp, piercing look, and told him to pass a message along to their boss. He'd be paying him a personal visit very soon. Then, without a single hint of mercy, he punched the smaller man too. Later, with his half-sister, he visited a teddy bear shop. Yang asked if she could get some teddies and a new doll. He smiled and told her warmly she could buy anything her heart desired. They had already bought clothes, so now it was time to get what she truly liked. As he watched her, thoughts stirred deep within him. The more memories he forged in this life, the more something within him began to change. Emotions were steadily growing in his heart. For now, it was just pure compassion, but he could feel something much more building. Dojin had been kind, even toward Yang, his half-sister. There had been a flicker of warmth. He decided that, at the very least, he would protect that tender part of Dojin's heart. She pointed at a ragged, worn doll, and asked if she could have that one instead. He handed her a large, brand new one, and gently reminded her that she could choose anything she liked. Her face lit up, and she beamed with joy. They ate out at a small, cozy restaurant. Just as they were finishing their meal, a woman approached them. She looked surprised, and wondered aloud if it was really Dojin she was seeing. She looked him up and down, scrutinizing him, nodding that he didn't seem to be dressed well at all. She added that he didn't look like much of anything, and then harshly asked who was next to him. With sharp, cutting words, she accused him of causing trouble, just like his mother. The girl turned to him and quietly asked, "Who is that lady?" The woman glared at the girl, demanding to know her name. The girl softly replied, "My name is Yang." The woman sneered, openly mocking her. "You must be from that times family," she spat. She scrutinized her with utter disdain, then scoffed at the cheap clothes she wore. "You look just like your mother," she declared. Her gaze then shifted to the silent boy, mocking his silence. "Nothing to say, boy?" she challenged. She leaned in, a cruel glint in her eyes. "You little rat," she hissed at the girl. "Do you even know what the word whore means?" she demanded. Just then, he rose to his feet, a chilling calm in his voice. He called her an ugly wretch who looked like an orc, She was utterly stunned by his sudden outburst. His mind flashed back to his troubled past. Born out of wedlock, he'd been raised in grinding poverty. At age 7, after his mother's death, he was finally taken in by his biological father, but that life offered him little comfort. For over a decade, he endured discrimination, scorn, and crushing neglect. When the legal wife bore a son, he was once again pushed to the side. He was eventually cast out, forced to live with a maternal grandmother, and a half-sibling he'd never even met. What unbearable pain he must have endured. Yet, through it all, he thought to himself, things will be different now. He turned to the woman again, reminding her they'd lived together for 12 years. Yet, despite all that time, she still viewed him with utter disgust. He declared her fake personality, her face, even her dull mind, all of it was utterly hopeless. The nearby bodyguards were frozen in shock by his unbelievable audacity, but the boy didn't stop there. He accused her of being jealous of girls who were kinder or more beautiful than her. He claimed she was consumed by an inferiority complex, and in truth, no better than this young girl, who at least cared for her brother. Well, absolutely furious, the girl snapped at him, demanding to know what he'd just said. But before things could escalate further, another woman suddenly arrived. The girl immediately dashed to her, unleashing a flood of complaints. She recounted every single word he had said, seething with anger and visibly upset. But the woman merely told her to stay out of it, and even labeled her behavior as uncultured. Turning her attention to him next, she asked if he had been doing well. She added that even if he had been swamped with work, it would have been nice to visit home once in a while. A cold chill descended upon his thoughts. He remembered how this woman had relentlessly tormented him for 12 agonizing years, more than anyone else. She tried to continue speaking, saying that his father worried deeply about him, but he sharply cut her off. He declared that their relationship wasn't the type where they asked about each other's well-being. He bluntly told her to get lost. Even she was completely taken aback by his words. She wondered if this was really the same Doden she used to know, the boy who would meekly bow his head in silence, even when slapped without reason. The girl ran after her mother, frantically calling out for her to wait. He turned and told Wei Young it was time to go. She agreed, and they walked away together. In his mind, he said farewell to the version of himself who used to stay silent while being mistreated. He inwardly warned them that it would be in their best interest to realize he was no longer that person. Meanwhile, inside the car, the plump girl complained to her mother. She couldn't understand why they had just left. Without doing anything, she argued that they should have crushed him, right then and there, repeating his words. But then, her mother's expression turned serious, and she asked the driver why Dejan was still alive. The driver then spoke up, explaining that, according to the report, the man with him had left him inside a rift zone. The woman repeated her question, her voice sharp. Why was that bastard, who should have died, still breathing? The driver apologized profusely, and promised to investigate further. Her daughter was confused and utterly horrified. She asked her mother what she possibly meant. Had she really tried to kill him? But the mother wanted to know if the girl still had feelings for him. The girl immediately denied it, and told the lady it wasn't what she thought. But the girl warned her that, if their grandfather or father ever found out, things could become dangerous. Without waiting for more questions, the mother silenced her daughter. She said that this was something she, as the mother, would handle, and told the girl to stay out of it. Then deep in her thoughts, she cursed at him, calling him a low-born bastard, and vowed that no matter what, she would make him disappear. 10 years ago, the rift zones began to appear. From within them, monsters surged into the world, and slaughtering people without mercy. Global chaos followed, a wave of destruction spreading rapidly. But then came the heroes, individuals capable of resisting the monstrous tide. With their emergence, the panic began to ease. From the slain monsters came magical stones. These stones quickly replaced conventional energy sources, powering the world in ways no one had imagined before. Nations around the globe shifted their focus, converting the unstable rift zones into regulated gates. Society evolved, and soon, every major industry was centered around gates, and heroes to survive, to thrive, to make money. Becoming a hero was now essential. In the bustling district of Yongduinpo, inside the headquarters of HCS Capital, a confrontation unfolded. Dajin stood tall and unyielding, as the boss demanded to know who he was. Behind the boss stood two of his men. Bruised and defeated, the boss growled, asking how he dared show his face there. After wrecking his crew, the boy replied calmly, stating that the more he thought about it, the more he realized he had taken a loss. Confused, the boss asked what he meant. He explained that he deserved compensation, both physical and material. Considering all the damage caused, the boss watched him intently, sensing a profound change within him. His demeanor was sharper, radiating newfound confidence. This wasn't the same person they once knew at all. He speculated that perhaps the gate had awakened him, bestowing upon him new power. The boss scoffed, claiming that people like him, arrogant pricks who bragged about their awakening, always met the same miserable fate. He gestured toward 3 new arrivals, reminding him that they too had awakened, yet ended up as nothing more than D-rank trash. He warned that he had plenty of D-rank thugs under his command, people who wouldn't even let him utter a word. 5 men stepped forward, surrounding him, yet he remained undeterred. He told them all to sit down, declaring he wasn't finished talking. One of the underlings barked back, attempting to put him in his place, but before the man could finish speaking, he coolly removed his spectacles and landed a punch straight to the underling's face, knocking him out cold. Just then, Dajin turned to the others and calmly stated that he knew their operation extended far beyond mere loan sharking. They were forging hero IDs too. If he was going to start making real money, he needed a clean ID, one that wouldn't cause trouble down the line. He made it clear, bring him a flawless ID by tomorrow. No excuses. The boss and his crew stared in stunned silence. They couldn't comprehend what kind of monstrous strength they had just witnessed. This wasn't a D-rank fighter, maybe not even a C. He could be a B rank or more. Overwhelmed and realizing the high stakes, the boss reluctantly agreed. Before leaving, the boy brought up one more thing. He asked if Hong Heiju had been the one who gave the order to kill him. A shadow of the past crossed his mind. Still, the boss didn't answer immediately. Pressed again, he finally gave in. He admitted that, yes, it had been that woman. She said she hoped he'd be buried in debt, and pushed him to suicide. The boss pleaded for mercy, but Daejun remained ominously silent, mulling over his words. So that was the reason for suicide. She had hoped he'd lose everything and end his own life. He pressed him again about getting trapped in the gate. The boss vehemently denied any involvement. He insisted he knew absolutely nothing about it. Why would I send someone to their death? He argued. If I was still owed money? It makes no sense, he claimed. But the truth slowly settled in. He knew now. This was the man who had dragged him into the gate, the mastermind responsible for everything. He gave one final, chilling order. Bring me every bit of information you have on him, by tomorrow. The boss nodded desperately, agreeing to everything. Daejun turned and walked out, his mind filled with a quiet, burning determination. He remembered the last wish of the one who came before him, a desire to see his grandmother and sister live in a home safer than any other. That wish burned fiercely in his mind. Without someone like times to fulfill it, it would have died, unspoken and forgotten, and so he vowed silently. While he was at it, he would do more than just survive. By the very next day, Dogen had obtained his hunter's license. Officially, he was now recognized as a B-rank adventurer or hero. At the entrance of the ominous gate, he scanned his new license card through the machine. A robotic voice echoed, "Hero registration card verified." The system then warned him, repeatedly, "Your level is below the recommended grade. Please proceed with caution, and think carefully before entering." He muttered to himself, annoyed. The agency should have just raised it to an A rank instead. Yet the automated warning continued to repeat, tirelessly, "Your level is below the recommended grade." The gate he stood before was infamous. The Poison Gate. Classified as a B-grade dungeon, entry was strictly not permitted, unless there were at least 2 people in a group. However, this one was truly something else. Specifically, it was classified as a degraded gate. Tackling such a gate solo was incredibly difficult, all thanks to the powerful monsters lurking inside. Even worse, the gate's narrow, tunnel-like structure strictly enforced solo entry, meaning, unless you were at least A rank, clearing the gate was practically impossible. But sometimes, luck simply didn't matter. He thought, if someone was truly unfortunate, they'd end up facing hundreds of monsters, all alone, in a pitch-black, narrow tunnel. He gazed into the dark passage ahead, and muttered he was starting to like it. Then, a monster appeared right in front of him. He swiftly killed it, then extracted an Amara stone. As the creature fell, he pulled out an Amara stone. He identified it as a black fang snake, a venomous beast, notorious for its paralyzing poison. A poison that could affect you with just a mere graze. The gloves he wore were stained with a bit of the toxin, but he wasn't concerned at all. He casually noted that kill just earned him 300,000. As he glanced behind him, more snakes were emerging. Without hesitation, he slaughtered them all, one by one. After clearing out the mess, he began searching the bodies for magic stones, but not a single snake had dropped one. He thought to himself that if this place was anything like his previous world, the drop rate for magic stones from black fang snakes was less than 3%. Looks like he'd need to kill a few hundred more just to get any results. Pressing deeper into the dangerous dungeon, he finally came face to face with the gate's boss, a massive snake, easily dwarfing all the others. He was relieved, saying it was convenient the path ended here. He decided to finish things swiftly and head back. However, he noticed his attacks just weren't landing properly. The snake's body was covered in incredibly tough armor, rendering his punches utterly ineffective. Suddenly, the snake's tail whipped around and slammed into him. He stumbled, then quickly got back up, ready for another round. But as he attacked again, he quickly realized this creature was on a completely different level compared to anything he'd fought earlier. Its skin was impossibly durable. His physical strikes were doing little to no damage. Frustrated, he couldn't help but think that, if only he'd regained his former power, a challenge like this would be nothing. Suddenly, his eyes caught sight of an old sword, lying nearby. Even though it looked worn, he admitted he had no other choice. He quickly picked it up. He mused that even a worn-out sword could be deadly in the hands of a skilled wielder. He decided to borrow the weapon for a moment, and dashed toward the snake, ready to strike. Dajin deemed it an honor for the beast to be slain by his hand. Gripping the sword tightly, he struck with a single, powerful blow. The blade cleaved clean through the massive creature, killing it instantly. However, the sword shattered in the process. He admitted, internally, that, if he hadn't intervened just in time, the situation could have turned into a complete disaster. Examining the snake's remains closely, he noticed its incredibly sharp tooth. He picked it up, concluding that, though short for a proper sword, with some sharpening, it could prove incredibly useful. He even mused that the creature's meat might taste even better than Naaman, which brought him a small, fleeting sense of relief. Eventually, he exited the gate's confines. Looking weary, the young man remarked how surprising it was that even a lowly, B-rank gate could demand so much of his time. Restoring his strength now became his absolute top priority. He chuckled softly to himself, hoping his old combat acquaintances hadn't seen him in such a weakened state. The scene then shifted to the shop, where Dajan had recently sold his mana stones. At that moment, another customer stood at the counter, trying to sell their own collection of stones. The cashier remarked on the sheer quantity, nodding. The customer had indeed gathered quite a lot. He reminded him the commission would be 40%, as per usual. The customer instantly objected, claiming the commission seemed far too expensive. The cashier calmly explained that their rate was actually the cheapest available. He then pointed out that the basic gate centers already charged a steep 5% commission, and unlike the gate centers, this shop left no transaction records, meaning customers wouldn't have to pay any taxes. With all that in mind, he insisted the deal was still in the customer's favor, offering a clean, profitable transaction. The customer then asked about the cashier's injuries, particularly his swollen eye. The cashier sighed, telling him, "Don't ask. It was the result of a crazy bastard who had shown up and beaten their guards senseless, even attacking him." The customer then commented that relying on guards too much could be dangerous. He believed that hiring guards based on their scale, not just their rank, was far more important. He argued that ranks were mostly for civil servants, convenience, and didn't reflect real skill. There was a big difference between a freshly licensed guard and a seasoned hero who risked their lives hunting monsters. While the cashier silently wished the guy would just stop lecturing, the customer added that they weren't strangers anymore. They'd known each other for a day or two. He told the cashier to call him if he ever needed help. Just then, he times walked into the shop, catching the cashier's attention. The cashier immediately recognized him as the one who had injured him and pointed him out. The customer turned to look and commented on his tall figure and good-looking face. He asked whether this was the one who caused the recent disturbance. He questioned how someone who called themselves a hero could assault an innocent person, reminding him that heroes weren't supposed to lay a hand on civilians. The cashier began to worry. That customer was a 7-year veteran hero, with many connections among senior and junior hunters. Getting on his bad side could cause serious trouble, but the man simply told him to mind his own business and get lost. Both the customer and cashier were shocked by how casually the response came. The customer, frustrated, asked if he planned to get revenge for the earlier incident. He insulted him and then paused, remembering that one cause of death for heroes. Beyond the monsters themselves, he'd often get into accidental disputes with fellow heroes. His 7 years of experience instantly kicked his instincts into high gear. He backed off, quipping they'd meet again, then simply walked away. Meanwhile, he calmly approached the counter, his bag of Mona stones in hand. The cashier, still clearly on edge, nervously asked him to place the bag onto the scale. And when he did, the cashier's eyes practically popped out. These were incredibly high-grade Mona stones, far superior to anything they usually saw come through here. He couldn't help but wonder to himself just who this mysterious man truly was. The system swiftly calculated the grand total. A whopping 150 million won. He quietly mused about what an exhausting day it had been. And yet, this amount still felt lacking. He extended his hand, flatly demanding the full 150 million. The cashier quickly corrected him, reminding him that the shop, of course, took a commission. He just stared back with a slow, lazy gaze, causing the cashier to nervously wonder if he'd said something wrong at all. He finally spoke up, stating that the commission should only times be 1%, making the total 148.5 million won. The cashier's patience snapped, and he shouted, insisting the commission was a whopping 40%. He muttered angrily, clearly recalling similar past experiences. But then, he casually pointed out that any transaction over 100 million won required superior approval. Dojin flatly told him to get that approval, right now. The cashier, utterly defeated, reluctantly called his boss, and began explaining the impossible situation. While he was still on the line, the man suddenly snatched the phone right from his hand, and spoke directly to the boss himself. He bluntly ordered him to hand over the money. The boss on the other end responded that he understood, and asked to speak with his employee once more. Instead, he simply hurled the phone against the wall. But remarkably, it didn't even break. He repeated the boss's words, then demanded the money again. The cashier, utterly defeated, could only obey, and brought out the full amount, packed away in plain paper bags. He then quipped, dryly, that they should have another cool deal next time too. The cashier, seething, bitterly thought about that phrase. Since when was a deal ever cool times for just one side? 10 minutes later, the frustrated boss finally showed up. He demanded to know why the cashier hadn't answered the phone, and insisted on an explanation for that earlier call. But the cashier had clearly reached his breaking point. He flat out announced he was quitting, saying he simply couldn't take it anymore. As the boss just stood there, still glued to his phone, the cashier watched him speaking intently into it. The boss was asking someone named Julian to come on over. Moments later, a stunning woman strode into the shop. The boss welcomed her with open arms. The manager then addressed her directly, and she confirmed, "Yes, my name is Julian." The cashier instantly recognized her. She was Julian, the 4th-rank hero. He vaguely remembered she was the boss's niece, but he couldn't quite figure out why she was here now. She simply stated her uncle had called her in. Apparently, he was dealing with a major headache involving a hero who was interfering with monostone transactions. She added that she didn't know the full details yet. Meanwhile, the scene shifted to Dojin's house, where he sat deep in quiet meditation. He reflected on a harsh, undeniable reality. Despite hunting tirelessly all day, he barely managed to earn 100 million won. At this snail's pace, everything would be too late. He knew it. He had to be capable of solo hunting an S-rank dungeon within a single day, or even sooner. To do that, the most important requirement was to regain the formidable strength he once possessed. But unlike in his past world, the mana in this atmosphere felt incredibly lacking. Even if he gathered mana like this every single day for 3 years, it still might not be nearly enough. It might take even longer than that. The boy considered that getting some decent equipment would definitely help. But unfortunately, there wasn't much to be found here, not even among the many trash-tier items. His intense thoughts were suddenly interrupted when he saw Yang playing innocently with a teddy bear. A sudden, icy chill ran right through him. He sensed something ominous and quickly rushed toward her, telling her to get inside immediately. Grandma, thoroughly concerned, asked, "What in the world is going on?" Suddenly, the ground violently trembled beneath their feet, but he quickly realized this was no ordinary earthquake. This was the undeniable, telltale sign of a rift tearing open. Grandma stood there, utterly bewildered. She frantically questioned what in the world was happening. He sternly warned her to stay in her room. It was far too dangerous. Without a moment's hesitation, he dove headfirst straight into the swirling rift. Meanwhile, at the Hero Association's command center, an operator urgently reported a new rift detection. On the map, a man's voice boomed, ordering immediate action. First, identify the exact location, and dispatch all nearby heroes without delay. The operator confirmed. The rift had shockingly appeared right in a private residence's yard. The man frowned. A rift in a private residence? This was especially troublesome. If a civilian, not a hero, were to enter the rift, our entry would be blocked until they came back out safely. And even worse, if the civilian died within, it would unleash a devastating monster wave that would persist for a grueling 10 days in the rift zone. This would endanger the entire surrounding Seoul area. He then asked if the identity of the person who entered had been confirmed. A staff member at the computer promptly answered, "The person's name is indeed Dojin. He is a resident of the house where the rift appeared." His maternal grandmother reported that he had entered the rift in an attempt to rescue his younger sister. The leader absorbed the report, grim-faced. So, if he wasn't a registered hero, then a civilian had entered a freshly formed rift. He asked, "What's the probability of a monster wave occurring?" The technician's grim answer, 99.99%. Elsewhere, a woman reeled back in shock. She asked, "What's this about Dojin awakening?" It was none other than his stepmother. A subordinate explained that, based on prior reports, he had previously crossed paths with heroes, and probably awakened during a prior gate event. The woman exploded in fury, cursing him relentlessly. She hissed, "It would have been better if they'd simply killed him outright, instead of complicating everything." She darkly reminded them that she had accepted good money for that task. She demanded they inform the assassin that, if he failed to eliminate Dodan, he'd have to pay back 10 times the bounty he'd received. But the man simply told her there was no need to contact the assassin. Confused, she asked what he meant. The man explained that a new rift had opened, right inside Dajan's own house, and it had been confirmed he'd entered it. He added that this would soon be public knowledge, as the media would announce it shortly. The woman thought to herself that this meant they wouldn't have to see that vulgar man ever again. The man confirmed her assumption, but cautioned her to remain alert until they were absolutely certain. She agreed, and he acknowledged her instructions. Inside the rift, Dajan looked around, struggling to believe the sight before his eyes. It strikingly resembled the Pasha forest he used to frequent as a child. The very structure of the forest, the distinct shapes of the trees and the grass, they were all intimately familiar. The sheer abundance of mana in the atmosphere, even the unique shape of the sky, and the fluttering of the trout matched exactly. He pondered, if the path ahead truly led to what he suspected. As he ventured further, he finally saw it. The magnificent world tree stood directly before him. A primordial spirit tree, the world tree held a concentrated flow of pure, raw mana. It was the very reason his original world had once faced destruction. When the world tree was burned down, its mana flow was plunged into utter chaos. But here, this world tree appeared completely intact. It had remained hidden, perfectly untouched. He realized that standing in its sacred presence might allow him to fully recover the immense power he once possessed. With quiet determination, Dajan sat down before it and began to meditate in front of the world tree, channeling the ancient mana it held within. For 10 consecutive days, Dajan focused solely on his breathing. During that entire grueling period, food and drink became distant memories. Nothing else mattered, not even a little. His concentration stayed fixed and absolute, totally immersed in just breathing. Then, on the 10th day, a presence loomed behind him. It was a fearsome creature, a volcano. He recognized it instantly. These were precisely those monsters that once scorched the world tree. Standing resolute before them, he prepared to annihilate every last one. He mused a weapon would have been useful, especially one with a water element, but swiftly decided it didn't matter. With fierce determination he declared he would annihilate them all. With a simple flick of his hand, a powerful shockwave erupted. Its sheer power instantly felled one of them. He understood then that one of his arms had unleashed a burst of condensed mana, shaped and detonated instantly. He hadn't used that kind of attack in ages, and now that he had, he felt the rush of power surge through him again. This was exhilarating. More monsters readied their strikes, rushing toward him. But as they charged, not one managed to land a blow. He remained utterly untouched. His focus briefly flickered. He'd confirmed the world tree was safe. With that worry gone, he shifted his attention within, to the mana within himself. He decided to observe it firsthand. Reaching toward a charging monster, he grabbed it directly by the mouth and halted its attack with a crushing grip. He effortlessly crushed the creature. One by one, the monsters toppled. His confirmation was now absolute. With the threat handled, he mused. Once he eliminated the remaining enemies, he would likely obtain the Undying Ember. Recalled, this item had a pretty high drop rate. Intrigued, he wondered how many would drop. And just then, more enemies emerged. And again, he swiftly wiped out several more. With the battle done, he returned to meditation. Then at last it appeared, the Undying Ember. Holding it, he reflected on what it took to gain it. Again, he considered the possibility of drawing more mana from the world tree, but acknowledged that with his current body, it was impossible. Instead, the only option available to him now was to absorb the ember and convert his mana into a fire attribute. He recalled how, in the past, he hadn't even needed to absorb the ember. Now it took him 10 whole minutes just to absorb a single one. Still, he accepted the situation and focused on what he could do. He moved his hands again. and found more embers appearing before him. Looking at them, he made up his mind he would continue absorbing them, holding his focus steady, and pushing forward with the task, for as long as he could. The rift had grown more unstable by the hour, pulsing with unnatural energy, and the risk was steadily expanding. Journalists gathered around with eager cameras, and the growing crowd stared anxiously, murmuring among themselves. Suddenly, a black car rolled toward the rift, carrying a group of officials. Among them sat a man, whose expression was already twisted with irritation. Bang was visibly frustrated. He couldn't believe that because of one reckless boy, they were now stuck dealing with this mess. Kim, seated beside him, tried to offer some clarity, explaining that the boy had only entered the rift in an attempt to save his younger sister. But Bang immediately dismissed the idea. He didn't believe it for a second. In his mind, Dajian had entered not out of love or duty, but because he'd heard some foolish rumor. That awakening in a rift zone was easier, and he'd run off chasing strength, without a second thought about the consequences. If the boy wanted to die, Bang muttered bitterly to himself, then he should have done so quietly, not dragged innocent people into it, by causing a rift outbreak in the middle of the city. Another official asked what the guildmaster had to say about the situation, but Bang shrugged the question off. The master had only repeated the same standard protocol, wait for the wave to come and assess then. But even he had his hands full this time. The rift wasn't unique to their location. It had opened simultaneously across the globe. The US, China, the UK, Turkey, Switzerland all at once. And while every other country had managed to stabilize their situations early, theirs was now in disarray. All because of one kid, who thought the world would bend to his will. Bang was seething. He'd already decided that if the boy ever returned, he'd show no mercy. The moment Dajin stepped out of the rift, Bang swore to himself he'd make him pay for what he caused. Time passed. 28 days had gone by since the rift first appeared. The Hero Association had now issued a Level 1 monster wave alert. The situation was growing dire. If the civilian who had first entered, referred to now simply as Mr. S, didn't emerge in the next 2 days, the alert would escalate. Just then, the ongoing news broadcast was abruptly cut off. In a quiet office elsewhere, a sharp-eyed man turned to his secretary and asked if Mr. S was in fact Dodon. The secretary nodded. He'd already confirmed it through his operatives. There was no doubt it was Dodon. The man leaned back, mulling it over. He asked with a calm detachment what the odds were of Dajan returning alive. The secretary, equally cold, said that if Dajan was just a civilian, then talking about his chances was meaningless. It was less than 0.1%. The man broke into a devilish grin. The idea of Dajan being merely a civilian was laughable to him. After everyone who'd tried to extort Dajian had already been thoroughly beaten, those fools at the Hero Association were simply misinformed, foolishly believing he was weak, all because they lacked any real intelligence. The man mused silently to himself. What if Dajian truly had awakened? But the secretary cautioned that even if he had, it all depended on the rank he achieved. Just being able to fight didn't mean he could survive a rift. Strength and survivability were two very different things. Still, the man's mind spun with thrilling possibilities. He suddenly recalled Dajan had 2 family members. His lips curled into another dark, predatory smile. He would secure them, just in case. The secretary asked cautiously what he planned to do with them, but the man's eyes glinted with pure malice. If Dajan died, they would sell his family off for profit, and if he lived, they'd claim they had taken care of them and saddle him with an enormous debt. Meanwhile, deep inside the rift, Dojin stood once again before the world tree, its trunk radiating soft, blue light from the energy that poured endlessly out of it. He'd been powering up for what felt like an eternity, and had long lost all track of time. Hundreds of undying ambers had already been absorbed into his body, and their power surged mightily within him. Now, at will, he could wield flame attribute mana, and his resistance to fire had soared. If he focused only on the fire attribute, his current strength even surpassed the days when he had once been called the Sword God. In this other world, he stood quietly, pressing his hand against the glowing bark, world tree, whispering his thanks. Then and now, it had granted him strength, again and again. And looking around one last time, he gathered the remaining mana stones, placing them carefully in a bag. As he stepped away, a part of him knew he might never see the tree again. But if they ever crossed paths in the future, and if the tree ever needed his help, he silently swore he would protect it. Without a moment's hesitation, with that promise still lingering in the air, he turned away, his body hardened and honed, scarred and powerfully muscular, disappearing into the glowing distance beyond. Night had already fallen back in the real world. Dajian emerged quietly from the now closed rift. He immediately noticed the profound silence. There wasn't a single living presence. Within a 1-kilometer radius, It was obvious the entire area had been evacuated. In preparation for a potential monster wave, he stretched out his heightened senses and released a slight pulse of aura in a single direction. Then, he followed it. Soon enough, he sensed two officials monitoring the rift's perimeter. Their uniforms looked all too familiar. They belonged to the Hero Association, the very same ones from the last gate. He sighed inwardly, annoyed. Dealing with them again would certainly be a hassle, so he acted without a second thought. He summoned fire mana, forming a small amber orb, and hurled it toward an abandoned junkyard nearby. It landed with absolute, deadly precision, erupting into a controlled yet dramatic explosion. Flames surged powerfully high into the sky, illuminating the surroundings with its chaotic light. The officials spun around, startled by the noise. Kim was the first to point it out clearly. A massive fire was now engulfing the entire junkyard. They shouted urgently to one another, trying to figure out how to contain the raging flames before they reached any nearby buildings. From a quiet, distant vantage point, Dajan observed them with a calm, detached air. He noted how astonishingly accurately the flames had struck the junkyard. The precise control, the immense strength, it was almost too perfect, almost unreal. And then, he smiled faintly, remembering Cusack, the strongest flame mage across the entire continent, from his previous life. Long ago, Cusack would have truly admired this flame. That thought brought a brief, unexpected warmth to his heart. Back at the rift, Kim suddenly turned toward Bang, telling him to look as they both spun around. They saw it then. The rift was gone. No monster wave, no signs of destabilization, just the faint, lingering traces of purple flame, still dancing in the air, before they too flickered out, vanishing without a trace. The rift had completely closed, before they could even react. It left no clues, no monsters, absolutely nothing. And far away, Dajan walked calmly down the road, his pace unhurried. He turned his head slightly, catching a final glimpse of the spot where the rift had once been. A faint smile curled at the edge of his lips. He was finally free. The very next day, the news hit like a thunderclap. The newly emerged rift in the Maple area had vanished, and even more strangely, it happened early that very morning. That day marked exactly 29 days since Mr. Dodon, a non-registered resident of Zone Z, had entered the rift. The Hero Association, which had been bracing itself for a full-scale monster wave, was left dumbfounded by the rift's sudden disappearance. A full-scale investigation into the cause was immediately underway. At the same time, a mysterious fire had broken out in a nearby junkyard, resulting in a massive explosion that left the entire area in ruins. Elsewhere, a young man in a hoodie wandered the streets, unnoticed. It was Dajan, skillfully concealing his identity beneath the nondescript clothing. Passers-by chattered, some mocking the man who had recklessly dashed into the rift. They said he was probably dead now, adding that it served him right. After all, everyone knew to stay away from a rift once it appeared. But one among them quickly shut the others up. He said that people like them had the luxury to talk big, only because others risked their lives. Inside those hellish cracks, if the rift hadn't disappeared on its own, the entire city would have become a war zone, and then, none of them would have had the chance to sit around, flapping their mouths. Dajan absorbed it all, his expression unfazed. Yet, deep down, a familiar pang of melancholy stirred. If the rift had truly vanished forever, he realized he'd never see the World Tree again. That thought alone left a bitter taste in his mouth. Still, as much of a shame as it truly was, perhaps it was for the best this way, because there were still crucial things in this world that he was honor-bound to protect. Eventually, Dajan made his way to the HCS Capitol building. Inside, several shady men were lounging around, cigarettes dangling from their lips, laughing, and openly gloating. They were utterly convinced Dojan was dead, and with him finally out of the way, the old man and the little girl would be easy prey. Their boss, they confidently believed, would finally have the freedom to act as he pleased. Something everyone agreed upon would be nothing short of absolutely despicable. One of them smugly remarked that their boss wasn't just some random street thug, but someone dangerous enough that no ordinary person could ever hope to handle him. He was supremely confident the boss would wring at least 10 times the value out of the 2 remaining victims. Another one took a long drag from his cigarette and muttered that while the old man could be easily discarded, the kid looked decent, maybe even captivating. Someday, the boss, he added with a truly twisted grin, would surely find some way to make use of her. Their vulgar chatter stopped cold when a low, eerily familiar voice echoed through the hall. The man asked, "Where is your boss?" Heads snapped around, no one moved. Outside, the boss casually strolled out of his luxury car, unhurriedly fixing his meticulously styled hair. His secretary walked briskly beside him, clipboard in hand. The boss was practically glowing, clearly in a fantastically good mood. With a wide grin, he asked, "What's on my schedule today?" The secretary quickly flipped through her notes, and dutifully replied that there was a lunch appointment with the CEO, but absolutely nothing scheduled for the evening. That was all the boss needed to hear. He lazily told his secretary to contact Madame Kang, and inform her he'd be paying her a special visit tonight. Any new girls on the scene, he wanted them all dressed to the nines. He was ready to have a blast. But before they could even step inside, a chaotic uproar instantly grabbed their attention. The boss barely had a moment to react, before something slammed into him with brutal force, sending him flying and spewing blood. As he struggled to his feet, gasping for air, his eyes locked onto a young man, casually lounging in a chair, with his feet casually propped up on the table. It was Dojan, and his glare was absolutely ice-cold. Dojan didn't even need to raise his voice, but the threat was undeniably clear. He told the boss to crawl over to him, like a dog. The command was simple, yet it carried an overwhelming, crushing weight. The boss froze, drenched in a cold sweat. When he hesitated, Dojan repeated himself, his voice sharp. "Didn't you hear?" he growled. "Bark. Someone like this boss didn't even deserve to be treated like a human. If he wanted to live, he'd better act like a true mutt." Terror-stricken, the boss began to bark, but it was weak and utterly unconvincing. Dojan wasn't satisfied. He demanded more. He wanted him to bark like he truly meant it, like a dog who knew his place. While the pathetic noises echoed across the room, Dojan then turned his gaze to the others. He called them out for being spineless hypocrites, always bowing and scraping when he was around, but instantly ready to stab him in the back, the moment they thought he was out of the picture. He then asked the boss if he honestly believed this was the first time he'd dealt with a scumbag as despicable as him. The boss dropped to the floor, his forehead pressed against the ground. He desperately begged Dojan to spare him, swearing he'd be loyal from now on, loyal as a dog, if that's what it took to survive. But Dojan wasn't buying any of it. With a sharp kick, he sent the man sprawling. Then, he flatly told the secretary that he was the boss now. He didn't want to see decent men like the secretary working under such garbage anymore. After all, the secretary had always been good at cleaning up trash. And now, he had permission to get rid of this piece of it too. The secretary quickly knelt and pleaded. The boss, he explained, had connections. If he vanished now, it would raise suspicions, and people would start sniffing around. Wouldn't it be wiser to give the boss one more chance to make things right? But Dajon's gaze was cutting. He asked if dumping someone in a barrel and tossing it into the sea wasn't the secretary's trademark, or crushing them in a junkyard, which everyone knew he was capable of. He warned the man that, if he didn't deal with the boss now, he would be the one thrown into a gate as monster food. Everyone in the room stiffened in terror. The boss, still groveling, resumed his begging, promising over and over that he'd do anything at all, if Dajon just let him live. Dojun turned away, knowing he should kill the man to avoid trouble later, but strangely he found himself hesitating. Maybe he was going soft. He raised his hand toward the boss, who took it as a sign of forgiveness, and began thanking him profusely, saying he would serve him like a big brother from now on. But Dajon's expression didn't soften. Without a word, he activated his fire ability, and seared one of the boss's hands. Then, as the man screamed in agony, he ripped it off, tossing the charred flesh aside like garbage. He stared down at him unmoved. This, he said, was the final chance from now on. The boss's sole duty would be to protect Dajun's family. If anything happened to them, even a scratch, Dajun swore, he would slaughter every last one of them, without hesitation. If they wanted to survive, then they would have to guard them day and night, 24 hours a day for the rest of their lives. Officially, Dajun had been declared missing, presumed dead, lost to the rift, along with the collapsing dimensional field. News outlets had already published their obituaries and touching retrospectives. Even the government had issued official statements confirming his untimely death. Every single media channel repeated the same tragic story. The boy was gone. Yet, here he was, alive and well, sitting calmly inside a small, cozy restaurant. He watched his sister devour her food, her eyes gleaming with delight. As he stared at the news articles on his phone, a quiet, chilling realization settled in his mind. There was no need to reveal he'd miraculously come back. Doing so would only invite absolute chaos, unwelcome attention, and far more trouble than he or his family could ever afford. He knew they'd have to move soon, especially with his boss likely changing locations. But there was no need to rush just yet. He simply wanted his little sister to enjoy herself. She was absolutely beaming, eating until her tiny stomach could hold no more, clearly delighted by this rare, special treat. When he told her they'd be moving to a new place soon, and that she could finally go to kindergarten, like all the other kids, her bright smile instantly wavered. That subtle, heartbreaking shift in her expression didn't go unnoticed. When he gently asked what was wrong, she hesitated for a moment before explaining that the other children had cruelly made fun of her for not having a mom or a dad. The sheer weight of her innocent words struck him harder than he'd expected. With a voice both gentle and firm, he told her she absolutely didn't need to go to kindergarten if she didn't want to. There was no reason to see kids who bullied her. She could just start school next year, like everyone else. That brought her radiant smile back, brighter than ever before, and she seemed utterly relieved, even thrilled, at the idea of skipping kindergarten altogether. Watching her, Dajin quietly considered whether a prestigious, private school might be a better option for her, somewhere no one would ever dare to look down on her again. That powerful thought led his mind to a vivid memory. Not long ago, he had barged into a rundown motel, in the dead of night, demanding to know why his grandmother and sister were staying in such a place. It was a truly shady place, crawling with drunks and all sorts of shady characters. The staff calmly explained that this motel was fully under their management, and was, in fact, relatively safe despite its appearance. But Dajan couldn't care less about their assurances. All he wanted was to see his family. The moment he stepped into the room, both his grandmother and sister gawked at him in shock. For a brief moment, they were utterly frozen. Then, as if waking from a deep dream, they rushed towards him. His grandmother clutched his hands tightly, whispering that she wasn't imagining things. Her boy had truly come back. His sister sobbed as she embraced him, and all he could do was offer a soft smile and reassure them. Yes, he was home, and yes, he was alive. Back in the present, the girl looked up at him with wide-eyed curiosity and asked, "Are you a hero?" That question truly caught him off guard. He half-joked, asking if she'd still like him if he was one. But instead of the enthusiastic response he expected, she told him she hoped he times wasn't times one. Heroes, she said, had to fight scary monsters. Sometimes, they didn't come back. She didn't want her brother to go off and die like that. She just wanted him to stay with them for a very long time. Her pure honesty stunned him. Even now, even after all he'd endured in the ruined, monster-filled world, where he had survived as everything else fell apart, hearing that someone simply wanted him to live, not fight, shook something deep inside him. He had lost so much in that other world. Years of bloodshed had taken away more than just people. They had dulled what was precious. But maybe, just maybe, he could protect something small and peaceful now. If his family truly wanted him to live, then perhaps that was truly enough. He didn't need to be obsessed with slaying monsters anymore. Elsewhere, inside the towering headquarters of the Hero Association, another conversation was unfolding. Nat, founder of the Hero Association and director of the World Hero Federation, stood in his massive office, gazing at the stacks of reports on his desk. He asked his secretary if they'd found anything yet, but she regretfully informed him that they still hadn't discovered a thing. He found that deeply troubling. If a rift could just vanish without warning, then it could reappear just as suddenly, and that kind of unpredictability was incredibly dangerous. The secretary added that logically, the rift should have triggered a powerful wave, but Nat cut her off before she could finish that thought. He was more concerned with the fact that the city had been spared. Perhaps, the sudden disappearance of the rift was a blessing in disguise. If it had released a wave, the consequences would have been truly catastrophic. The secretary quickly realized her mistake and apologized for her carelessness. She understood how truly serious this was. Nat wasn't just a powerful man. He was one of the most respected heroes in the world, ranked among the top 100. If he ever decided to run for president, polls suggested he'd win by a historic landslide. Corporate giants feared him. Political rivals actively avoided him. But Nat had no interest in politics or business. His only focus was on protecting people and preparing for whatever lay beyond the rifts. He told the secretary to keep digging, no matter how long it took. She nodded and also informed him that the homeowner near the previous rift site had agreed to sell. Nat instructed her to offer more than the market value. If the extra compensation brought even a sliver of comfort after such trauma, it would be worth it. But just as he looked through another stack of reports, something odd caught his eye. The rift hadn't been an isolated event. Similar occurrences had been reported in multiple countries. According to the documents, the US and China, they had swiftly contained their incidents, but the situation in the UK was rapidly worsening. But their most trusted heroes were already deployed elsewhere, leaving them utterly unprepared to respond in time. At that moment, an emergency alert blazed across Nat's screen. The UK had officially declared a state of high alert. Civilians were being advised to evacuate. A massive wave had been detected. The World Hero Federation had sounded the alarm. The next disaster had already begun. Outside, amidst the bustling streets, Dojin stood once again before the mana stone exchange, a heavy bag slung over his shoulder. Without a moment's hesitation, he pushed open the door and stepped inside. The receptionist looked up, ready to greet the customer, but the words caught in his throat, as his eyes widened in shock. It was him, the very boy who had flipped the shop's commission system upside down. Panic immediately took over, and the receptionist frantically called out for the manager, shouting that the kid, who had forced the shop into a measly 1% commission deal, had returned. The manager, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a stern expression and the kind of formidable build that usually made people think twice, stormed out from the back room. He fixed his intense gaze on Dojin, clearly attempting to intimidate him. But Dojin remained calm, his tone utterly collected, as he casually remarked that the timing was perfect. He had a huge haul of mana stones to sell that day, and it seemed only proper that someone with actual authority should handle it, instead of leaving things to the brat at the front desk. As he spoke, he let the heavy bag drop onto the floor with a muffled thud. The manager looked at it with utter disinterest, already assuming that the kid had, once again, brought in a pile of unrefined, low-grade stones. Without bothering to check, he flatly refused to do business, telling Dojin to leave immediately. Confused, Dojin asked why, only to be met with a frigid explanation, that their 1% commission was bleeding the shop dry with significant losses, and they weren't about to repeat the grave mistake of doing business with someone who forced deals right onto them. Dojin couldn't help but let out a laugh. He casually remarked that the manager would surely regret turning him away like this, but the man clearly wasn't interested in hearing anything further. He scoffed, saying there was no point in explaining how the gate center operated on a mere 5% commission, or how the entire Mona stone distribution system was already overly complicated. Enough in his eyes, there was little value in trying to reason with an arrogant kid who just didn't understand how business worked. Turning with a harsh expression, the manager once more ordered Dojin to pick up his bag and leave, warning him never to set foot in the shop again. But instead of replying, Dojin gave the bag a light kick. Several stones spilled out, rolling across the polished floor. Both the receptionist and the manager froze in utter shock. These weren't the cheap, low-grade stones they had expected. These were something entirely different. Hero mana stones. The manager's expression shifted instantly. He recognized their telltale shimmer, and the dense mana signature. A single hero mana stone could sell for any price a person was willing to name. His mind raced. How could a kid like this be carrying something so incredibly rare? With a casual shrug, Dojin remarked that, if they weren't interested in buying the low-grade stones, then maybe they should just forget about it. But now, the manager's priorities had completely flipped. Hero mana stones weren't just rare, they were legendary. There had once been a lord from Mexico named Kira, a prominent figure known for dismantling mana stones to manufacture medicinal items. One day, he tried the same trick with a hero mana stone, and it exploded. Yet, the resulting burst of power didn't kill him. Instead, it awakened him as one of the world's most powerful heroes. Since then, such stones became highly coveted, not just as a mana source, but also as catalysts for awakening latent potential. Their value soared, making them essential commodities for anyone seeking immense power. Faced with the shocking reality of what lay on his floor, the manager no longer had the nerve to reject the boy. Yet, Dojin, unmoved, told them to pack the stones back into the bag. He declared he'd be leaving, and the manager instantly changed his tone, now calling Dojin a valuable customer, and practically begging him to stay. While the receptionist scrambled to gather the scattered stones, with shaky hands, the manager offered Dojin a cold drink, and invited him to sit for a moment. Trying to sound casual, he then asked why Dojin had lowered the commission even further, from 1% to 0.5%. Wasn't that a bit extreme? But Dojin didn't offer any explanation. He simply replied that if they felt it was too low, then they shouldn't take the deal. The manager, now sweating profusely, hastily clarified that he didn't mean it that way. He was just curious about the reasoning. That's all. Dojin, clearly annoyed, replied that the reason was simple. The manager was irritating him. That was enough to justify the change. The manager began banging his head on the table, apologizing profusely, and admitting he had spoken without thinking. But Dojin, growing weary of the theatrics, cut straight to the point, and asked whether they would match the rate or not. From the side, the receptionist was quietly seething, watching in disbelief, as Dojin refused to show even a shred of respect toward the manager. Desperate to salvage the situation, the manager began rambling about the rarity of mana stones. Most companies, he claimed, would jump at the chance to buy them at market price, without any commission, just to secure supply. But Dojin had already had enough of the lecture. Rising from his seat, He calmly declared that, if the manager didn't like the offer, then he should just sell the stones elsewhere. Panicked, the manager quickly backpedaled. He raised the commission offer to 9%, pleading that even at that rate, they'd still be losing money. Dojun remained totally unaffected, and simply advised them not to take losses. They should just walk away from the deal. As the manager continued to negotiate, the numbers slid downward. 8%, then 7%, and finally, a paltry 6.6%. He whispered that if his boss ever found out, he might literally be beaten to death. Dojun raised an eyebrow and chuckled. In that case, you should try not to give your bosses a reason. The back and forth continued until the manager, barely able to breathe, finally agreed to return to 1%. Dojun relented, saying he'd accept the original rate, just this once. For old time's sake. The manager was utterly undone. He wanted to accuse the young man of being a master swindler, but found himself utterly speechless. The stones were simply too valuable to let go. And just as the manager thought the madness had ended, Dojun calmly revealed that he had 7 more bags, full of hero mana stones. The color drained from both the manager's and the receptionist's faces. The manager barked at the receptionist to stop standing around like a statue and hurry up with the contract paperwork. Moments later, a notification chimed on Dojun's phone. He glanced at the screen and saw a new deposit. 67 billion. One transferred from the stone shop. At this rate, even that 110 billion. One mansion he'd been eyeing didn't seem so out of reach anymore. But as satisfying as the deal had been, Dojun knew there was a deeper problem. Gates alone couldn't provide high-grade mana stones, and until he could roam freely through all the rifts, there would always be a ceiling to his income. Just then, his phone buzzed again. This time, the alert tone was different. He checked the screen, and both the manager and receptionist watched him closely. As tension crept back into the room, when the manager asked what was going on, without a moment's hesitation, Dojun replied that an urgent emergency alert had come in from the UK. A monstrous wave had just broken out in their southern region. After scanning the public service announcement, Dojun scoffed to himself. The officials, the guilds, the self-proclaimed protectors of humanity, they were all just the same. Ineffective, disorganized, and too scared to make the hard calls. In his past life, in that other world, he wouldn't have hesitated for a second. He would have charged headfirst through every rift, sealing every tear in reality with his own blood, if necessary, all while ignoring whatever country or authority dared to try and stop him. But not anymore. That Dojun was long gone. This time, he chose peace over senseless war. The scene shifted, the tension melting away, as the air filled with the rich, savory aroma of premium meat, sizzling on a charcoal grill. Thick cuts glistened invitingly over open flames, sending delicious juices dripping into the embers below. Across the table, Dojun's little sister stared, with sparkling eyes and drooling lips, completely captivated by the sight. Their grandmother, however, looked less enchanted and more panicked. They were seated in a ridiculously high-class restaurant, where even a single serving of meat, just 100 grams, cost an outrageous 250,000 won. The old lady couldn't help but frown in deep concern, quietly asking Dojun how on earth he planned to pay for something this expensive, but the boy simply smiled and reassured her not to worry, telling her to eat as much as she wanted, because he had earned more than enough money. This time, his grandmother remained hesitant, but his sister wasted no time at all. She took a bite, and her eyes rolled back in pure bliss, as the tender meat melted in her mouth. Watching her reaction, Dojun glanced at the platter, and realized the portions were far too small. He casually waved over the butler, ordering 4 more servings of the same premium meat, for each of them. Again, the old woman interjected, worried about waste and wondering how 3 people could possibly devour so much food. But Dojun just chuckled, unfazed, and insisted she eat to her heart's content. Today was a day for pure celebration. Having come from such a humble background, they'd never even dreamed of places like this. It was high time. They finally tasted what life had denied them. The grandmother, however, was still reluctant, but Dojun's sister nudged a succulent piece toward her, urging her to try just 1 bite. And when she finally did, her face lit up. The texture, the perfect seasoning, the way it simply dissolved on her tongue. It was worth times everything asterisk. With that, the 3 of them eagerly tucked in, genuinely enjoying their meal with broad smiles. But this pleasant moment didn't last long. The sharp click of approaching heels cut sharply through the warmth of the room. Someone was walking up to their table with a clear purpose. It was none other than Julian, the famed female hunter whose mere presence turned heads. Her commanding voice sliced through the air as she called out to Dojun, asking for a moment of his precious time. Without even glancing up from the sizzling grill, Dojun calmly told her he was eating with his family, and if she had business with him, she could simply wait. His casual dismissal stunned everyone, but especially Julian, who blinked in utter disbelief. Surely he hadn't understood who she was, so she clarified, introducing herself again as Julian, a high-ranking hunter. Yet Dajun remained completely unfazed, simply continuing to serve his sister. Another succulent slice of meat. Julian could hardly believe what was unfolding. She was used to people groveling for a single moment of her time, not the other way around. And yet here she was, being made to wait. So she did. The top 10 ranked beauty in the world, an S-ranked hero admired across nations, found herself sitting quietly in the waiting area. As Dajun finished his meal at his time's own deliberate pace, the onlookers whispered among themselves, utterly astonished. What kind of man could keep someone like Julian waiting? The answer came swiftly, in the form of data. Julian had clearly done her homework. Just 2 months ago, Dajun had stepped into his first gate. Not only did he survive, but he'd re-emerged even stronger. Whispers had swirled about his supposed demise, in a high-level rift. But clearly, those were all lies. He was alive and well, devouring expensive cuts in a lavish restaurant, right alongside his family. That alone set him apart. His composure, his control, the way he treated even an S-rank, like a minor inconvenience. Julian found it difficult to grasp. As she pondered these thoughts, Dojin finally stepped out of the restaurant, his family laughing beside him, as they gushed about how delicious everything had been. But his gaze quickly locked onto a familiar face. Julian was still waiting, but that wasn't what caught his eye. Standing nearby, looking just as surprised, was Kang, the very man who had abandoned Dojin in that lethal dungeon, leaving him to die. Kang's expression twisted as recognition dawned. He stared at Dojin like he was seeing a ghost. His voice dripped with venom as he muttered that Dojin was like a cockroach, always crawling out of impossible situations, when he should have just died already. He called him a vermin, a pest that just wouldn't stay down. Julian was caught off guard. Of all people, Dojin was bickering with Kang? She didn't understand what history they shared, but something was clearly burning between them. Before Kang could get another insult out, Dojin turned to Julian and said that, if she had something to say, now was the time. Kang froze, his eyes darting between the two. He was baffled. Why was Julian waiting for someone like Dojin? But Dojin ignored him, his focus now on the woman. With a firm tone, he told Julian that if she wanted to talk, she'd have to do him a small favor first. Julian raised a brow, unsure of what kind of request was coming. Dojin simply pointed to his grandmother and sister, explaining that all he wanted was for her to call a cab, and make sure they got home safely. That was it. He had other matters to deal with. Julian was puzzled, wondering what he planned to do next, but Dojin gave her a cold, sidelong glance, and said that their conversation could wait. He had a debt to collect from an old friend. His tone made it clear. He hadn't forgotten what Kang did, and now it was time to settle it. Julian calmly approached Dojin's grandmother and little sister, placing a gentle hand on the door of the cab and urging them to get inside. She spoke softly but firmly, telling them not to worry, and assuring them that she would handle everything. Even though the two were visibly anxious, the authority in her voice convinced them. With a flick of her hand, she instructed the cab driver to take them safely to their hotel, waving them off as the vehicle pulled away. Back inside, the atmosphere had completely shifted. Dajun stood, with his body lowered into a tight, fighting stance, each of his movements controlled and coiled with force. His fists flew with terrifying precision, landing on Kang's face and ribs, with bone-cracking impact. Every punch he delivered was packed with intent, not just to hurt, but to punish. Kang staggered backward but still refused to yield, laughing bitterly through bloodied lips, and swearing he'd crushed the cockroach, once and for all. A terrified waitress tried to intervene, stepping between them despite her fear. She pleaded with Kang, her voice trembling, begging him not to cause a scene inside the restaurant. But instead of listening, the man's rage exploded. With a vicious snarl, he struck her across the face, sending her tumbling to the floor. She would have hit hard if not for a nearby customer, who caught her just in time, steadying her and shielding her from further harm. Kang wasn't done. His eyes scanned the restaurant. Wild and violent, he shouted threats, claiming ownership of the place, warning that if anyone dared to interfere, he'd kill them on the spot. The entire room froze in fear. But for Dajun, that was the final straw. His expression darkened as he stepped forward, and with one powerful strike, he slammed his fist into Kang's swollen face, sending blood spraying across the table. He stood over the man, his voice cold as steel, demanding if Kang truly had been the one who left him for dead. Inside that gate, Kang, now bleeding from multiple places and barely able to stand, couldn't even answer. Dajun wasn't finished, not by a long shot. Kang spat blood and sneered, as delusional as ever. He taunted Dojin, mocking his past, reminding him how his father abandoned him and how even his stepmother had no use for him. It was venomous and low. But Dajun didn't respond with words. Instead, he calmly pulled out his phone and held it up, demanding Kang repeat what he had just said. Kang laughed, thinking it was a bluff. He called Dajun pathetic and dared him to do something. Then, as if digging his own grave, he crossed a line no one should ever cross. He began insulting Dajun's mother. That was enough. Dajun's eyes glowed faintly, and before Kang could even finish his sentence, the boy moved. A pulse of psychic energy erupted from him, and his mana surged. The next punch Kang threw never even connected. Dajun's abilities diffused at mid-air, with invisible force, redirecting the momentum and hurling Kang several meters back like a rag doll. He crashed into a table, flipping over it and groaning in pain, stunned that his full force blow had been so effortlessly dismantled. Kang's body lit with a blue aura, and his mana surged as he tried to power up further. But Dajun didn't flinch. He took a step forward, and with a flash, launched himself toward his opponent, finally ready to finish what had been long overdue. In the chaos, the trembling waitress fumbled with her phone, trying to call the authorities, but her hands were shaking. Too much to remember the emergency number. Just then, Julian materialized right beside her, and gently took the phone from her hand, telling the girl she'd handle everything, and there was no need to be afraid. As she turned toward the escalating battle, Julian's trained eyes instantly took in the entire situation. The raw strength, the fluid movements. Kang, an AB-ranked hunter, was being completely overpowered. There was no doubt in her mind anymore. Dajun was beyond B rank. He was easily A rank, if not higher, possibly even S rank. Her eyes narrowed as she shouted a warning, telling Dajun to stop before he went too far. If he seriously injured Kang, there would be severe consequences. He might even die. Hearing that, Dajun paused mid-step, glancing at her with a frown, asking what she meant. Julian explained without hesitation. Kang's cousin was none other than Yang, an S-rank hunter with immense influence and power, and someone who deeply cared for his younger brother. Hurting Kang would mean making an enemy out of Yang, and that was not something people survived easily. But even after hearing that, Dajun didn't look worried at all. He just stared at her, completely unfazed, and Julian felt a chill. This boy, he wasn't just powerful. He was completely unhinged. He knew the danger. He heard the name Yang and fully understood the consequences. But still, he had no intention of stopping. Kang, even while lying battered on the ground, gave a bloody smile and dismissed Julian's concerns. She suddenly realized Kang had always acted like this, because he knew he had Yang as an impenetrable shield. And that's how he had gotten away with so much for so long. And now, seeing Dajun not just challenge that protection, but completely disregard it, Julian was starting to feel something completely unfamiliar. Fear. Not just for the situation, but for the person standing right in front of her. Dajun's eyes briefly flicked toward her, and the raw killing intent in his gaze made her heart skip a beat. It was subtle. Not wild or chaotic, but cold and measured, like a true predator, weighing whether she was even worth the chase. Julian swallowed hard, a sudden gulp, completely unsure if she was calming the storm, or making things infinitely worse. Meanwhile, the terrified waitress had crumpled into a corner, quietly sobbing into her apron, whispering to herself, "But, the lady said she would handle this, so why does it feel like everything is spiraling even further out of control?" Kang lay unconscious on the ground, his swollen face barely recognizable. Julian stepped closer, keeping her voice calm, as she informed Dajun that she'd been sent by her uncle to personally handle the situation. She apologized for showing up uninvited, admitting it wasn't exactly ideal. Without wasting a moment, she shifted the topic, revealing she already knew that Dajun had recently sold a batch of magic stones at the exchange center. Instead, she wanted to propose something far better. She wanted to buy the Times Next Times batch directly from him. Dajun raised a brow, asking what she was offering. Julian replied confidently, stating she would purchase absolutely everything he had, at full market price, no undercutting. That caught Dajun completely off guard. He let out a short laugh, clearly surprised, before Julian added, smoothly, "That, an S rank. Hero's wealth was beyond what most people could even imagine. Money wasn't an issue." Still, glancing at the unconscious Kang, Dajun told her he wasn't against selling, but he had one critical condition. It wasn't anything complicated, he assured her. In fact, if she really was an S rank, like she claimed, it would be nothing for her. And if it was Julian herself handling it, then there should be absolutely no problem. The scene then shifted far from the chaos to an elegant, high-rise office. Dajun's stepmother sat simmering with rage, her manicured fingers tapping impatiently against her desk, and her face twisted with pure frustration, as she demanded, "How is Dajun still alive? He entered a rift. He was supposed to be dead. Her secretary stood respectfully nearby. She replied that, even the Hero Association had declared him dead, yet here he was, somehow alive. She demanded to know how he planned to fix this, especially after taking so much money to make the boy disappear. But the secretary had even more shocking news. He informed her that Kang had gotten into a violent brawl with Dajun. At first, the woman didn't react, but then it clicked. A fight between Kang and Dajun? That was going to cause serious problems. If her husband or father-in-law heard about this, it would be messy. Still, she thought she could smooth things over, as long as it didn't reach the media. She immediately ordered the secretary to suppress any media coverage of the incident. No headlines, no leaks. Only Kang's brother needed to know. She also wanted the police kept far away from the matter. Any legal investigation would turn the situation into a public nightmare, but they both knew that wasn't enough. The secretary continued, reminding her that Kang was Yang's cousin, and Yang was an S-rank hunter. Everyone knew Kang was trash, but Yang protected him. In truth, Kang wasn't just family, he was the one doing Yang's dirty work, cleaning up problems and acting as a shield. Now that Kang had been beaten, and the media was circling, Yang would be forced to act. The woman understood. The situation was spiraling out of control. She ordered the secretary to schedule a personal meeting with Yang as soon as possible. But there was more. She had also discovered that the head of HCS, Capital, had betrayed her, secretly, looking after Dajun's grandmother and little sister. That was absolutely unacceptable. She told the secretary to contact Prosecutor Park. She wanted the man to pay for choosing nobody's family over hers. The next day, the story shifted again. A large crowd had gathered outside a rift zone. South Korea was currently dealing with 37 active rift sites, 5 of which were dangerously close to forming a gate. The others needed scheduled hunts, exclusively managed by registered association hunters. At the checkpoint, Julian handed over her ID. The guard scanned her credentials, nodded in approval, and wished her good luck. Dojun stood silently behind her, observing everything. The guards clearly recognized Julian, treating her with respect, but still double-checking everything. They were locking down security with precision. That level of caution didn't go unnoticed. A girl from the expedition team, Young, glanced at Julian and raised an eyebrow. Young, an E-rank hero and leader of the Velvet Guild, found it odd that someone of Julian's rank would bother with something as tedious as Rift Zone hunts. When asked, Julian replied with a nervous chuckle, saying she was just bored with nothing else to do. She figured she might as well explore a rift. Meanwhile, Dajan had already made his terms crystal clear. If she wanted the magic stones, she had to let him enter the rift with her. Once that was done, he'd sell the entire batch at full market price. No markup. No tricks. When Julian asked why he was going this far, Dajan simply replied that nothing paid better than hunting in a rift. That was all. Julian couldn't quite understand it. Why would someone voluntarily risk their life for money? Was he truly that desperate? Maybe he was just reckless. Regardless, she needed those hero-grade magic stones, and if it meant dealing with Dajan, so be it. Even if this was a suicide mission for him, it wasn't her concern. The team soon entered the rift. The world on the other side was a thick, humid jungle, teeming with strange sounds and moving shadows. Moving between trees, the group stayed cautious. Young glanced at Dojun and leaned closer to Julian, asking who the quiet guy trailing behind them was. Julian didn't want to answer and brushed it off, saying he was just someone she knew. But Young wasn't satisfied. She asked if Dojun was boyfriend material. Julian shot that idea down instantly. No, she stated flatly. She owed him a favor, nothing more. That was the sole reason she'd brought him along. Young looked utterly confused. An S-rank hero like Julian owing a favor to a nobody? It simply didn't make sense. But before she could utter another question, the jungle erupted into chaos. A colossal bird with gigantic wings burst through the dense treetops, shrieking as it plummeted toward the team. The hunters immediately snapped into defensive formation. Orders were shouted. Block its legs. Hold its wings down before it takes flight. But before any of that could happen, Dajun broke into a sudden sprint. He ran straight toward the colossal monster, ignoring all formation plans. It was a reckless move. Or so they thought. The other hunters gasped, unsure whether to chase him or retreat. But then, they heard his calm voice cut through the chaos. Dajun simply stated the bird was already down, before it could even take flight. And to their utter disbelief, the beast's wings twitched once, then collapsed.